All right, I think everyone coming in has slowed down, so I'm going to go ahead and get us started. So first off, welcome everybody to the presentation tonight, Big Year of Birding. We're going to share some really awesome stories, learn a little bit about what that even means, and lots of good stuff. So, but first, before we get into that, I just want to go over a few, I guess you could call them housekeeping things, and let you know a little bit more about our organization. So the Missouri River Bird Observatory, if you haven't heard of us before, but I recognized a lot of names on the participant list. We are a nonprofit organization dedicated to conserving Missouri's birds through science, education, and advocacy. And if you want to find out more about us, or if you want to see the different webinars we have coming up, you can see that on mrbo.org. And I'll share that website in the chat later on. But yeah, lots of cool stuff. So tonight we're in a webinar format, so we cannot see or hear you. If you want to communicate to us, which we highly encourage, you can do so in two different ways. So one, there's the chat button. So you can choose to chat with us, the panelists, or panelists and attendees, meaning that whatever you write in the chat goes to everyone. So you can put comments in here. If you're having any technical difficulties, please put those concerns in there as well. And then there's also a Q&A button. And so if you have a question for the panelists, this is a great place to put it. It helps us make sure that we get to your question. I'll monitor the chat as well for any questions that you put in there. But it's much easier for us to see it if you put it in that Q&A. And yeah, and that's pretty much it. So, and also the webinar will be recorded, so you can access all of this information at a later date, and we'll send out that recording after we conclude the webinar as well. So now I'm going to turn it over to Eric to give you an introduction to tonight's topic.
Thanks, Paige. Hello, everybody. Good evening. My name is Eric Ost. I'm the field project leader with MRBO. And tonight was a topic of my choice. We typically do weekly webinars, and usually Paige and our directors, often they pick the topics, but especially this year, as I was becoming more and more of an avid e-birder and keep constantly checking for rare birds, I was seeing Dave's name up all the time, and same with Kendall's, as well as a lot of you I see on the that are participating here. And so it just inspired me to kind of wonder a little bit more about their experiences of having a big year. And so first, though, I just want to share a short presentation just to give you a little bit of background information about what a big year is and kind of the direction it's going. And then it'll be a good segue into learning about Kendall and Dave's experiences. So his big year in birding, of course, we had to put this photo here of the big year because for a lot of people not in the birding world and community, this is what really exposed them to get a glimpse of what it's like to bird. And, you know, this is an extreme version of birding. So I just had to throw it in there. So what is a big year? So a big year is a personal challenge or an informal competition among birders who attempt to identify as many species of birds as possible by sight or sound within a single calendar year and within a specific geographic area. So often could be by a state level, county level, or continent, or even at the world level. So it was made popular by the US in the 20th century, and big years now occur worldwide and are attended by many each year. So there have been variations that a lot of you all probably are familiar with, such as like a big day. So Cornell does that big day. And so you try to rack up as many species as you can on one day. The big sit, which was something that the New Haven birding club here at Connecticut, they started in 1992, which is essentially what, as the name implies, it's like a 2-day sit within you can't move within a 17-foot radius. You have to stay within that 17-foot radius and count and record as many birds as you see. And then of course there've been more newer variations such as the green big years, which are all about kind of birding, kind of environmentally conscious. And so often with these big years, they tend to be gas guzzling and a big carbon footprint. And so this is just one way that some people are trying to encourage birding green. So you all are probably familiar with Andy Rago and Chrissy McLaren's their Green Collective Big Year, which was something that they were trying in Missouri to get everybody to bird more green. And so a little bit about the origins and where we are now. So Roger Tory Peterson published the first modern field guide to birds in 1934. And this was kind of key to big years and birding exploding in the US, as prior to this, a lot of the descriptions and illustrations about birds, they were not catered to the layman that didn't really know all about the anatomy and physiology of the bird. And so Peterson was able to highlight the visual features of the birds to make it more identifiable by someone trying to discern if it was between a tundra swan and a trumpeter swan. And so then the earliest known continent-wide big year record was compiled by a traveling businessman in the 1930s. The way he did this was he coincided his business trips with the best birding seasons for different areas around North America. And in his best year in 1939, he saw 497 species. So now with the development of birding listservs, eBird, and other mediums of communication, big years have become pretty productive and successful. Everybody's getting more and more birds in recent decades. And so some milestones after this. So, typically now in recent decades, often people will exceed over 700 species in the American Birding Association area, which is essentially North America, north of the Mexico border. So now some milestones. So the first female to break 700 species occurred in 2008. In 2019, an Australian birder set the ABA record at 840 species. And who knows in 2020, if we didn't have COVID, who knows what that could have been. But still, 840 is a phenomenal number. And then in 2016, a Dutch birder recorded 6,852 species during a global big year. That's just mind-boggling. And so, I mean, think about the money involved with that and the gas involved with that. It's just, and the time, it's just, I can't even wrap my mind around it. So that's all I have for kind of a little description and brief overview of what a big year is. And now we're going to turn it over to our panelists who themselves have both completed big years. And Kendell, as far as I know, has completed a couple of big years, one in the state level and then this past year at the county level. And Dave just finished his big year in 2020. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Kendell, who will kind of give us a little description and intro, and then we'll transition to Dave, and then we'll open up some questions. I have some opening questions, and then we really just want to hear from you and start the conversation and learn a little bit about everything that took place in their big year and some of the trials and tribulations. So with that, all right, Kendell, I'll turn it over to you.
Hello. Thank you, Eric and Paige, for having us. This is going to be pretty awesome, I think. So I completed my state big year in 2018, and the currently at that time the record was set in 1991 with 314 species. But I didn't start my year trying to do a big year. I had gotten really into birding pretty heavily in my local area. And I had seen about 200 birds in my local area in the southwest corner of the state in 2017. And I thought, I think for 2018, I'm going to press myself. I'm going to try to see 250. That's my goal, 250. And in my personal life, had just graduated from graduate school at Missouri State, and I was about to start my student teaching. And so right at the beginning of 2018, I had about 2 weeks of nothing, like no job, no homework, no responsibilities. And so I birded a lot in the Southwest corner. And as time went on, Greg Swick specifically started saying like, "Oh, you're doing kind of well. Why don't we go birding a couple times together?" And so he started showing me some hotspots around our area that I hadn't previously visited, and my number just kept rising and rising and rising. And so eventually, I started making treks around the state and started picking up rarities and started meeting more people. And as my network grew, it became much more easy to pick up rare species. So in a big year, if you think about all the species that are possible in the state, you can kind of divide them into separate categories. You have common species, species like American robin or northern cardinal, that I could leave right now and I could find one probably even before it gets dark. And then there are uncommon species like red-headed woodpecker or maybe wood duck in some areas that it's going to take a little bit of trying, but you'll be able to find that species every couple of days. And then you get into rare species that maybe come into the state once a year, or maybe fewer times than that. And then you get into some very rare species that are maybe once every 5 years or even fewer than 10 times ever recorded in the state. And if you're doing a big year and you're hoping that your number can be as high as possible, you really have to get all of the common and all of the uncommon, and hopefully as many rare and casual and accidental species as absolutely possible. Yeah. Did that kind of introduce what you were thinking, Eric?
Absolutely.
Excellent.
And how about you, Dave?
Yeah, that pretty much covers a big year and how to approach it. As far as me, I was just going to talk a little bit how I got started. I got started kind of late. As far as birding, I was in my 30s, I guess, and I was 19 in the 90s. At one point, I was at a party, and people find out if you're a birder, and they start making fun of you, of course. So one of my buddies happened to be there, and he started talking to me, Jeff Blunt. He said, "Gosh, I'm a birder too. Maybe we should get together." So we started birding together and started making trips around the country to various hot spots, and then expanded South America, Central America, and just things just kept rolling, and you want to do more and more. And then in 2018, I didn't know Kendell at that time, but I ran into him in Barksdale. That was when I was doing the big year up in there at Riverlands. And I just started talking to him, and I knew about Tim, his big year. I hadn't met Kendell before. And I just kind of casually asked him, what his number was. That's what people ask you when you're doing a big year, what's your number? So I asked him, where he was at. And I don't know, that was in May, and he was close to 300, if not at 300. And, I just couldn't believe it. It just blew me away. So I talked to him a little bit about it then. I talked to Tim, and I saw Tim at the screen of one of his Prairie Chicken movies a little later, and talked to him some more. And I decided, I'm going to try this. And it's just kind of a personal challenge. And you're doing something that you love, so it's fun. I had a blast last year. I just had a great time all year long. And I planned it out kind of the way Kendell talked about. And things just fell together. Plus the birds last year were here. I think it was the most birds ever recorded in Missouri last year. So, if you're going to break the record, that's the year you want to do it. And I got lucky in that respect, so it worked out pretty well.
Awesome. So Dave brought up a good point of how we got started birding, and so Kendell, could you kind of give us a little intro on how you started birding?
Yeah, sure. When I was in high school, I was interested in birds, but I didn't really have a have like a way to access them, right? I didn't have any idea that there was as many species out there as there are. And then when I went to college, I majored in wildlife biology and I took an ornithology class, and that was really where I started understanding like, oh, this book, this field guide has all of these species in it and they're accessible to me. Like I'm sure we've all flipped through a field guide and thought, wow, I'll never see a snowy owl like that. You have to be really good to see a snowy owl. And that was kind of the attitude I had until I started like actually trying to find them. And some species are tough and some you get lucky on, but you start to see them. And like Dave said, it just advances from there. It's kind of addictive over time as you start to see new things, new birds, and meet new people. And so probably mid-college, a friend and I visited Los Bluffs National Wildlife Refuge for the first time. And if you've never been there in the winter, it's a huge wetland, and the number of snow geese there is absolutely astounding. Like it's hard to hear people talking from the noise of the geese. And that was like my first experience with like a large scale like birding event like that. I think many of us that before we were birders, maybe, or even if you're a non-birder, like you're traveling through your life and maybe not noticing birds. But when you stop and start noticing them, it's astounding how many there actually are. And that number of snow geese is hard to ignore. And after that, it just progressed from there to where we are.
Yeah, I kind of, when I started birding, before that, I always considered myself kind of a, nature freak. I hunted, I fished, hiked, camped, did all that stuff and loved it. And I was always interested in anything out in the natural world. And I was turkey hunting in the mid 80s, I guess. And it was after a rain that night. I was sitting there before the sun came up, sun comes up, and all of a sudden I was surrounded by all these warblers. Turkey season's in the spring, so this was early May. And I had no idea what they were, and I couldn't believe it, It's just amazing. I mean, I knew what an indigo bunting was. My dad pointed that out to me one time. I thought that was the coolest bird in the world. All of a sudden, I'm surrounded by probably 8 or 9 different types of birds. I had no idea what they were. I was so distracted, I had a gobbler walk up on me and never got a shot at him. But that kind of started it. And then I'm one of my best friend's dad, Lane Ulmer, he was a local birder here in St. Louis. I knew he was a birder because he had dragged his son out to see prairie chickens at 2 in the morning to get him out to the blind, and he was hated that. But he was kind of my go-to guy. I started calling him questions, and then as I got into it more and realized there's a huge community out there, I started. I was not hesitant to call up Connie Allwood or anybody, around St. Louis and ask them a question or get their advice and stuff. So that's how I kind of got started.
So the community aspect is it's kind of a good topic. So for me to ask this next question, which is, a big year, you're the only one that has that number, but can you speak to how much of a collaboration was required for you guys to get this number? And, maybe for you, Kendell, with a big year at the county level, it was less space. So did you have, that you could bird? So was there any difference in reliance on other people for, communicating what species are around there?
The amount of people that support you in a big year is incredible. For me, I was in my student teaching the first 6 months of my big year, well, from about mid-January to May. And if anyone is a teacher here, they know that you can't get paid while you're in that. So essentially I had a full-time job without the pay of a full-time job, which was kind of unfortunate. And then I got a teaching job in the fall. So I worked the whole time in the fall. So I didn't have time to get out in the field necessarily and search for species that I needed. I relied really heavily upon other people finding birds and communicating them, their location to me. I've used eBird a lot. You can set up a rare bird alert, and so it'll send you a notification when a rare bird is reported. And that way you can kind of plan on how you're going to be able to go travel and see that species. I relied a lot on people actually texting me or emailing me or just communicating it across different media. The state level versus the county level, I feel like the state, there are more people out looking, so it might be a little easier to maybe chase sightings of other people. The county level, there are fewer people and fewer habitats, and so it forces you to maybe search in places that you hadn't been. It makes both types of big year really make you understand the habitats of your geographical area really well. I feel like I really learned to experience and appreciate the habitats of both the state and my county in both my big years, because you're pairing that habitat with the species that you're finding. A lot of times the bird may be really difficult to find, but if you can narrow it down to a very specific habitat, it makes it a lot easier. And so if you can find the habitat, you can find the bird. But you're only one person, like you said. The number of people out searching definitely helps. And I'm sure, Dave, you relied on people just as much.
Oh, yeah, if not more. I mean, I know I showed, yesterday, I showed you my birding Bible, that my notebook I kept all year with everybody's names and phone numbers as I went. I got my maps and stuff in there, and it's full of pretty much every birder in the state. And, you know, a lot of times if you show up someplace, there'll be 8 or 10 birders there looking for a specific bird. You get their phone number and their email, and you kind of spread out, and somebody finds it, and you keep in touch, and you know that helps on that particular day. But my gosh, my days, you know, they started early, and there was always a text or a phone call or something from somebody that, you know, about a bird. And I was linked into eBird as far as the rare bird alerts that helped, but a lot of times other birders would call me before it even got on eBird. So, you know, you can make a dash out to try to get one of those birds, and you know how it is with birding. A couple times I just stepped out of the car and got the bird, and then it flew off. I was gone. You know, if I hadn't got that phone call, I would have missed out on that bird. So you got to be pretty lucky sometimes. But yeah, the network you develop, it's just amazing. It's phenomenal. I mean, couldn't have done it without all these people that were helping last year. I'm sure it was the same for you.
Yeah, the timing is vital. For me, especially with teaching, I would get out of school at 3 p.m. And so in the fall, especially, the days get shorter and shorter, and the distance I could drive from my school throughout the state got closer and closer to my home base. I mean, one time in the spring, I left school at 3 p.m. and I drove from Springfield to Weldon Spring to see a northern shrike. And I had basically allotted about 20 minutes to find that bird, and it took 17. And then I drove from Weldon Spring to Riverlands to see a white-winged scoter just as the sun was setting. And then I turned around and drove all the way back to Springfield and got up and taught at 7 a.m.
Well, that's like my black scoter you got me on in that lake north of Springfield. What lake is that?
Fellows.
Lake, yeah. And I was up looking at that red fowl rope north of there.
Yeah.
Found it, and I called. It was raining and it was getting dark, and I called you, and you were there with one of the Mennonite birders, and you said, "Still here." And I'm like, "All right." So I drove down there like as fast as I could, and got there, and the sun was going down, and but there he was, you know. And it's even timing, or Doug Homer and David Dean and I drove across the state to get white-winged crossbill from St. Joseph last year, and we left, gosh, I don't know, 3 in the morning or something, and we got there, and Stephen W. Martin and Tom Nagel were already there looking at the bird. So all we had to do was step out of the car, and you know, we enjoyed it for about 15 minutes, and then it flew off. You know, we just stopped to eat breakfast or something. We've never seen that bird.
Yeah.
So you know, it's timing. There's luck plays into it a lot too.
Very serendipitous.
Yep, it's a lot of fun though. It's the chase. I mean, it's fun.
Yeah.
Well, it looks like we have some questions now here. So, Paige, I don't know if you want to ask those or.
Sure, I can ask them. And we did get one notification, Dave, that it's a little hard to understand you. I can hear you okay, but if you, yeah, it looks like, yeah, a little closer to the microphone, I think it'll be fine.
Right.
Ooh, okay. So I think there's a couple of questions that are related in terms of locations. So we have a question about like to share any Missouri hotspots that you observed a high amount of species or unusual species. And how I would reword Sarah's question that I thought about earlier that I was curious about were there any locations in Missouri where you like felt like a kid in a candy store and like everywhere you looked there was like a new bird that you could put on your list? Either of you start.
Okay, well, for me, I think it was probably just the areas that I had never birded before, really, being from the eastern side of the state. So any of the prairie areas was a whole new set of species. Bluffs I'd never been to. I was there probably 4 or 5 times last year. That was really cool. I mean, you check off a great-tailed grackle and yellow-headed blackbirds are easy to find, and ibises and everything else. In Dunn Ranch, I went there in January. All the roads were iced over. It was just awful, but I was the only person there, so it was fantastic. So I had it all to myself, just driving around. And I'd never seen a prairie chicken, and I had them coming into a field, picked agricultural field, and dozens running across the road, loggerhead shrikes in January. Those type of areas were interesting for me because I'd never been over and experienced that before.
West Bluffs, I agree, is absolutely incredible. In Southwest Missouri, before the construction at Shallow Sage started, I really visited Shallow Sage heavily, and Four Rivers Conservation Area as well. The prairie areas, I'm super lucky to live within an hour of them. So every snow, it's really good birding out there. Probably the kid in the candy store moment, the one that I remember like the most. Tim Barksdale and I camped at Big Oak Tree State Park one weekend in May. And at that point I was getting really self-conscious because my list wasn't growing because I was working so much. And we woke up and I just every warbler that exists was in the trees above us, and tanagers and grosbeak and flycatchers flying around. And we had all 5 thrushes in one morning, and it was just absolutely incredible. Like if you've never visited there, the Boot Heel used to be this great dense, mature forest, and now it's agriculture fields. And Big Oak Tree is this island of that mature forest in the middle of just bare dirt. And so if you're a bird headed north for the summer, that little island is a great place to go. And it seemed like every bird that was flying that night had landed there. Just birds, just that expression dripping out of the trees was very true.
Awesome. Yeah. And that answered Amy's question. So that's great. And so, okay, I'm not sure if this was answered already, but people are inquiring, how many species did you each see and what was the big year record that you broke?
Okay. I'll go first, Dave.
Yep.
So the big year record that was standing when I started my big year was set in 1991 by Tim Barksdale. He ended his year with 314 species. And that last species was the famed Ross's gull at Riverlands, which is a high Arctic gull that had no business being down here, but somehow. But I ended my big year with 324 species. And my last bird was a golden eagle at Ted Shanks Conservation Area.
That's interesting because I ended my year, my last bird was a golden eagle at Clarence Cannon, which is just downstream from there, not too far. Yeah, I ended up with 326, which I got 2 up on Kendell. But you know, the thing is, yeah, I couldn't have done it without Kendell or you know, everybody else that I mentioned. But you know, Kendell personally got me quite a few birds, red-throated loon and black scoter, and I think you called me about that red fowl rope. So you know, it's birding community generally. There's you know, as much as you know, you'd like to have a good number at the end of the year, everybody helps you out. And the amazing thing, I'm retired, so I had time to get up every Monday morning and go wherever I wanted to go. And the fact that Kendell did his year, you know, around work and school, or if he was done with school, but around work and everything else, that's pretty incredible. I really don't know how to do it. I had a huge advantage being able to, you know, take off whenever I wanted to and go wherever I wanted to. And I wrote myself a note. I have to thank my wife, so I wrote that note so I wouldn't forget. But I mean, she supported me the whole time and allowed me to take off whenever I wanted to, and so I had a great time. She left me a note. I opened my computer. She had this. I don't know if you can see that. Says comb your hair. So she's at work right now, so she wanted to make sure I took care of that if I was going to be on a Zoom call. But yeah, it's. I mean, it was. I ended up with 326. Kendell was at 324. He beat Brad Jacobs that year, who unfortunately passed away. Of course, he was a birding legend, and he was at 323. And it seemed like past few years before he died, leading up to that, he kept getting higher and higher. So, and Mr. Barksdale, I've met him a few times, and Kendell certainly has too. The fact that he was able to do that, you know, before eBird. Is pretty amazing too. So
that segues into a good topic. The people in your personal life, my now wife especially, as well, their support of you is also really important. My students, none of them are birders. No one in my family is really a birder. But like you said, when you're at a party and people find out you're a birder and they kind of make fun of you, like that's kind of how it starts. And then they see that passion that you have, and I don't think they can help but support you. Like my kids, sometimes I would come back from a weekend trying to find a new year bird and I wouldn't have one. And they were like, why didn't you find one? What's wrong with you? Like, why?
Well, but those people you talk about at parties that make fun of you though, and you talk to them and they realize how much you're into it, and you start getting phone calls and pictures like, what is this bird in my backyard? Or, you know, what's going on with this bird? Why is he here? You know, and they haven't become hardcore birders, but at least, you know, they're showing more interest in what's going on outside with you.
Exactly.
Yeah, that kind of answered Bill's question. He had, Kendell, were your students interested in your project, and did you give them updates?
I did. So every day at the beginning of my class, I have like I call it a get started, and it's just on the projector. And it's like, if I'm not in the room, like this is what you need. You need your notebook, you need your pencil, or get your Chromebook out, or you need something. And so whenever I would get a new year bird, I would put it up there and I would say like, you know, prairie falcon, year bird number, whatever. And they had no idea what the birds were, but just the fact that I had one more, they were like, yeah. So they kind of got into it.
That's great. So did you guys, here's the question, did you all take photographs of a lot of the birds that you saw, or, you know, did you take them to then, you know, analyze later to, you know, make sure it wasn't something else? How much did you guys rely on photography?
Yeah, photography has really changed birding since I started over the past few years. And there's some excellent photographers. I got a small camera that I would try to get some pictures with. And then I started digiscoping. Brad Jacobs told me about a device you could get, and you hook up your smartphone to it and put it right on your scope. And I played around with that. Some of my efforts weren't too good, but I got some good pictures too. I mean, I tried to get a picture of anything that was rare for sure, but wasn't always successful. But fortunately, most of the birds that I saw that were rare, somebody else saw also, so that helped. We back after one of the tropical storms, I was up at Riverlands with Doug Homer and David Dean and Tommy Goodwin, and I had a tern flying upstream. I called out black tern, and then Tommy was looking at it like, no, it's not a black tern. And we kept looking at it, and the wing pattern was wrong and everything else. So we started clicking off field marks, and we're pretty sure we had a Sooty tern. And one showed up later that year down further south in Missouri, but it flew around a little bit and headed upstream, and we couldn't get a picture. And we submitted a report to the records committee, and they did not accept it, which I don't blame them. But I decided that, you know, I'm going to let them decide if they say it was a Sooty tern, I'm going to count it. Well, they didn't. As it turned out, it really didn't matter. I still ended up with 326, but we're pretty sure it was, but just couldn't get a picture of it. And but that would have been a nice one to have. But anyway, I would get, if you're going to take pictures, get the best camera you can and be familiar with it. I probably was not as familiar with my camera as I should have been, and that might have cost me a couple pictures.
Yeah, I didn't really have a great camera during mine, so I did a lot of digiscoping. That's like where you put your cell phone up to your binoculars or up to your scope. And so I relied on that. A lot of people saw the birds that I saw also, so other people had seen them to confirm that they were there. Now I have a small Nikon that I take out and use, and that helped a lot. It makes you more reliable, and like you hinted at, it helps you can ID it in the field, but sometimes your brain will trick you a little bit into seeing what you hope to see. And getting a few pictures and then looking at it in your camera definitely helps solidify your idea of what you actually saw. I know I've seen things in the field and thought, oh my gosh, and I look at the camera and I'm like, oh, that's something common.
It helps out a lot too with species like gulls.
Yes.
That are just my nemesis birds. I have a hard time with them, but if you can get some photos, you know, and then go home and analyze them, and more importantly, send them off to, you know, Doug Willis or Bill Rowe or somebody, or, you know, your local birding buddies, and get some opinions, and that helps. If you can get a good picture, you don't have to for sure identify it in the field, but it helps. Yeah.
So this brings up kind of a question kind of relating to equipment. So did you have to, or did you have really high quality equipment, binoculars and scopes, or did you guys upgrade before the big year started? And was that at all kind of a segue into another question, which is, you know, how much planning did you put, or in, you know, was there involved with this? I know, Kendell, yours was kind of spur of the moment after you started getting all these species, but once, you know, throughout the season, did you have, you know, significant planning where you're like, okay, school's finished for the weekend, I'm going to go here around the state and come back, you know, that type of thing?
I just had a modest pair of binoculars. They cost about $50, and I bought a scope off of Facebook Marketplace for $50. Yeah, and someone gave me a tripod, so that kind of worked out. I've upgraded a lot of that since, but at the time it got me through. Like, you need something that you can see warblers and trees that are, you know, 50 feet above you, and you need something you can see birds out on a lake half a mile away. Like those two things will get you really far. As far as planning, I had Dave and I talked about this a little bit earlier, that we both had like a big book of stuff that we used. I had planned out basically all of the really common species and listed them, all the uncommon species, and then I had a section of rare species, so that I knew when the alert came in or the text came in, I could look at that list and go, oh, this is super rare, I need to go. Or like, I can probably get this one later, that's not a big deal. And then I had it split up by seasons. So certain birds are rare, but they're more common in certain times. So like Sabine's gull is a decently, it's a rare bird in Missouri, but it's most common in the fall. So I don't need to necessarily go out and look for it in the spring or another season. I can kind of wait until the fall and get the best chance possible then. And so different seasons, you want to try to strategize on the different areas, different habitats you can visit. Does that kind of get at the question?
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
What about you, Dave?
Yeah, well, same thing, I would take off after something rare or unusual and hopefully get it early in the day. And then you have the rest of the day to bird your way home. And depending where you're at in the state, just kind of figure out in the time of year, figure out what could possibly be out there and where's the best habitat for seeing these birds. And you just stop by a park or someplace, Eagle Bluffs or wherever, and try to pick up more birds. And then towards the end of your big year, you're driving all the way across the state to get one bird, and then there's really nothing left to see on the way home. I mean, I would always bird anyway, just because that's what I like to do, but your chances of picking up something newer later in the year really start to, narrow down quite a bit.
So I have a question about, what was your nemesis bird? What was that one bird that took the most tries to get, and did you get it? Or
do you want to go first, Dave?
Yeah, well, for me, believe it or not, it was an Iceland skull, which used to be Iceland's and Thayer's, but they put them back together. And on the Mississippi River around St. Louis in the wintertime, you should see that bird. And that's one thing you need to do, which I didn't do. I knew gulls were going to be difficult for me, and I didn't really study up on them like I should have. And those Iceland skulls, and I saw quite a few just in January and February, and on the Mississippi, because the river froze over and they're all below the dam, and you could see them on the ice above the dam or below it. And then there were multiple Iceland skulls that I saw, and when I finally did get to see them, I'm like, well, they're not that hard to tell apart. But I was just intimidated by gulls in general, and I probably saw some during my big year and just didn't realize it. So that's something I didn't do well, was do my homework on those birds so that I would have been able to pick them out. And I never did see one that I knew for sure that it was. So I wasn't able to count that bird last year.
For me, probably the one that I chased the most that I did get was mottled duck. There was one mottled duck at Les Bluffs, and I think I drove up there from Springfield. That's like a 5-hour drive. I think I went up there 4 times for it and finally found it. But I think that might have been my 300th bird actually. But I traveled a lot for that one specific bird. And Les Bluffs, if you haven't been there, you really should visit. It's absolutely incredible, especially in the spring. But the bird I chased probably the most that was my nemesis was Say's Phoebe. The first Say's Phoebe in my big year was like late January, like an hour and a half from my house. And I chased after that specific bird 5 times, never saw it. I would go out, not see it. Next day, someone would see it. I would go back out, not see it. Never did. I chased 5 different Say's Phoebes in my big year, and I never did see one the whole year. And then so my big year was in 2018. And then in early February 2019, I found a Say's Phoebe like a mile from my house. So that's just how it works.
So Eric, is this a good time? Okay. There was a really interesting question and a topic I think is great for us to touch on, which is Julia asks if you guys found or encountered many or any minority birders, so people of like a minority in whatever sense, in all the various senses. And she just makes a comment when she tells people she's a birder, they look at her really weird, and she's in Lafayette County. And I just wanted you guys to touch on that. And I'll add that I don't think you're weird. I think you're awesome. And that there is some really great connections and things happening through National Audubon to bring people together, like Black Birders Week and different things like that. And Latino Outdoors does a lot of really awesome work with that. So, but if either of you want to answer that question, feel free, go ahead.
I really did not encounter much diversity ethnically while I was out birding. There's a gentleman around St. Louis who's more of a photographer, wildlife photographer, than a birder. So I would bump into him sometimes, and he's a Black gentleman, and I can't think of his name right now, but
is it Miguel?
Yes, Miguel.
Yes.
A good photographer, and he's a pretty good birder too. But he's the only one that I can really think of, to be honest with you. Yeah. There was a lady that birded around St. Louis quite a bit, and I can't think of her name either, but she was from India, and she still posts on Birds sometimes. She keeps in touch with some birders over here. But yeah, it's, for whatever reason, it's not a very diverse crowd.
Yeah, I agree. Diversity in the birding community in Missouri is definitely an area that we are probably weak in, and that hopefully will be strengthening in the future. I know the least, like, I feel like ethnically diverse, we're kind of low, but age-wise, I think that's starting to spread out a little bit more. I think in the past it was a lot of older adults, and now, like, I run into younger people and even kids like a lot more than I used to, which is awesome. That it's the hobby is spreading out into other groups of people, and that's just really cool.
Yeah, when I started birding, I was in my 30s, and I'd get out around Missouri to go birding, and I was usually the youngest guy out there. I was kind of the young gun. And then that has changed drastically over the past few years. I mean, Kendell, and there's, I know some birders that are high school kids that are excellent birders, and there's quite a few of them out there. And yeah, it's more and more popular, I think, it's got a bigger following with younger kids, I think.
Around Springfield, and kind of to the west, some of you may know there's a large group of Mennonite birders, and they are age-wise very diverse. I can think of, I went to one gentleman's home who had a green-tailed towhee near Buffalo, and there were like toddlers walking around with binoculars, and that was so crazy. and they like, it was amazing. Like, these people just, like, everyone had their own binoculars, and it was just very cool. I guess ethnically that is a diverse, it's two ways of life, like, interacting.
I think I was at, when I chased the Van-tailed storm petrel that I missed this year, I think Lyndon was down there.
Yes.
The birders you're talking about. And he had taken 2 or 3 of his daughters. It was so cute. This is like a grandfather talking. I'm a grandfather. There's these young girls that were maybe 12 or so looking through scopes, and they got on traditional Amish garb, long skirts and the hats and everything, and they're looking for birds. And it seemed out of place, but it was good to see. It was, and they were enjoying themselves,
You're probably getting a little scared about your record now, Dave, with all these kids.
Yeah.
Well, some of them are going to be tying for big years soon.
Oh, absolutely. There's a young man, Christian Hong, who lives in Licking, Missouri. And I ran into him a few times, and yeah, he'll break my record at some point. A friend of mine here in St. Louis, Doug Homer, is off to a great start. He's like at 134, I think, right now, which is ahead of my pace, and I think ahead of Kendall's from when he did his.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just a matter of, if he sticks to it, because it gets to be a bit of a grind. But, people push you a little bit, and so you keep at it, and it's a lot of fun. And I decided a few years ago that I was going to do a big year in Missouri, at least just once in my life. So, I picked the right year to do it and had a great time.
Awesome. Thank you all for answering that question. And yeah, and I think we're all can work to be more welcoming and be more inclusive. And that starts with all of us learning on our own individual levels too. So I don't know, I want to make sure we get to this question because it was in the chat and I didn't know if Eric, if you saw it. Shoot, I lost it.
Go right ahead.
I lost it. It was here. Oh, what was the most unusual bird you each have seen in Missouri and where did you see it? And maybe Kendell, if you want to go first. So what was the most unusual bird?
Ooh, the most unusual.
This may have been a bird we saw together, Kendall.
Oh, in Missouri ever?
Yeah.
Yeah, that brown booby for sure. That was last year. Dave and I met up with a friend of a friend who had a boat near Donovan, and he took us to see that bird. It was the first recording of that species in Missouri. During my big year, probably there was a white-tailed kite, which is a species of hawk from the Southwest. It was I think the third time it had been seen in Missouri. It was actually found by a 12-year-old Mennonite birder, and who just had a field guide and was out in his yard and contacted his relatives that were birders and said, I think I have this white-tailed kite. And they were like, there's absolutely no way that you just starting out have a white-tailed kite. And then they drove over and were like, oh, yep.
Yeah, that brown booby was the most unusual one I think I've seen in Missouri. We'll probably never see that again.
Yeah.
Very cooperative bird too. You could take the boat right underneath him and he didn't move.
But yeah, I mean, every bird, I think every bird you see is special in its own way. Like I went to Florida early last year before everything got kind of crazy, and like there were roseate spoonbills and white ibis, and those were species that I saw in Missouri that were like very special. Like this is a once in 5 years sighting, and in Florida they're kind of commonplace. And so it's interesting to like be able to tie together those areas, like protecting habitats in different spots. The bird connects those two locations really well. And now when I see a species like that, I think back to like, oh yeah, I drove like 4 hours on a weeknight to see that bird, or like slept in my car in sub-zero temperatures to see that bird. And it just makes it more special. So the rare part of it does make it more impactful, but you try to enjoy each species as you come across it.
Yeah, that's great. I feel the same way when I go birding. Or like when anyone asks you that question, like, oh, what's your favorite bird? And I'm like, you don't know it, but you just asked me the most difficult question in the world.
How do you choose?
We're getting some comments and thanking both of you for your experience. And they're all really enjoying the webinar and interesting. And I know we're getting close to the end. So Eric, I don't know if there's any like questions in there that we want to make sure we want to be able to answer everyone's questions. And I don't know, Dave and Kendell, if you have like a few minutes extra, but I want to be respectful of everyone's time. So just real quick before we answer those last questions, I think I am going to share one last thing, which is we have more webinars coming up and they're about connecting to the Missouri River. So first off, of course, we start with birds. So birds of the Missouri River. And so we'll cover some of the unique species that you might find there. And you can register through to these through our website, and I will share the link in the chat right after I stop sharing my screen. But we hope to see you there, and we're glad that you were able to join us tonight. But if you can stick around, we'll try to answer all of your questions, because yeah, this is just a really cool conversation. I don't want it to end.
All right. Yeah, there's a few other questions in here. One is, do either of you remember how many counts you had were just by ear? So how many birds that you just detected by ear on your big ears?
I think I'd have to look back, but I think the only one I had was a northern saw-whet owl. It was the only one that I counted as heard only. But,
I think I saw a whippoorwill. Probably Chuck Will's widow might be the only one.
yeah, okay. Yeah, Chuck's widow.
I feel like I saw a whippoorwill, but maybe not. Maybe I had two.
The Chuck's was heard only too. That's right.
Yeah, those are hard to find.
Yeah, but I did see a whippoorwill in the woods. This flush one.
Every now and then you almost step on one of those. Yeah, I think by the end of it, all the warblers that were singing in the spring, I saw at least one throughout the year.
What's the best time of year to visit Les Bluffs?
Well, I would go. Excuse me. Well, gosh, they're all good. Migration, of course, you get your biggest variety. But in the summer, you got breeding birds there that you don't have, that you can see easy, that you don't see other places, like the grackles and the yellowhead blackbirds and things like that. In the migration, you just have everything coming through. But in the winter, you get the huge concentrations of snow geese, like Kendell talked about. And I've never been there in the winter, where I've seen some in late spring and stuff going through there, but not the numbers, like millions that Kendell was talking about. And they do get 1 million or more snow geese there a lot of times.
I think my favorite time, Paige is right, all the time is great. If you've never been there, it's a huge wetland with basically one large circular road. So it goes around the whole place. The road's like 7 miles long. So if you can imagine how big that wetland in the middle of that circle is. And it's in a really strategic place, strategic as a big ear birder at least, because Missouri has that little bit that tips into Kansas, and it's in that little bit. So it's even further west. And our state sits kind of between two major flyways. And so birds that you get in St. Louis and the boot heel, where it's tipped into the east a little bit, are going to be different than those birds that you pick up maybe in Les Bluffs in the west. And so like David talked about, great-tailed grackle or yellow-headed blackbird being fairly commonplace there in late spring. And that's because it's so much further west than all of these other habitats where you might not find those species readily. I probably in late April, early May, sometimes if the conditions are right, you can get over 100 species in a day easily there. In the summer, they have sometimes they have sandhill cranes breeding, so you get to see parents and babies, and that's pretty cool.
Here's another question Karen has. It's asking about your dependency on Mark Robbins' book, Status and Distribution of Birds in Missouri. Did you have a PDF version, or what did you guys do? Did you refer to that quite a bit?
I kind of discovered that actually later as well. It was maybe late February when I really started looking into it, and I would kind of look for earliest and latest records for birds, see if I was wasting my time looking for a particular species. It's a great reference, and I got to talk to him a few times last year, and he gave me some good advice on how to go about my big ear. But eBirds really got a lot of the information maybe not as much historical information that Mark has in his book. It goes back quite a ways. But I mean, eBird, I mean, it's amazing what's on there, to be honest with you. And that's another thing you should do if you're going to do a big year, is familiarize yourself with that completely as far as setting up alerts. And there's things on there that I didn't know about halfway through my big year that probably would have helped me. But yeah, there's just an enormous amount of data stored in there. But I did refer to Mark's book, and I had it on my phone. I didn't print it up, but I would bring it up if I was unsure of the possibility of seeing a particular species at any given time.
I had his 1992 version. Greg Swick loaned it to me, and then he published the second edition in the middle of my big year. So I had that printed in a binder in my car, like at all times. So I would use that, like you said, to figure out kind of early dates and late dates. And he has some commentary in there that is different or a little more useful sometimes than the things you might find on eBird. eBird is really, really good for like abundance and locations, but knowing like, oh, this was the weather pattern when this accidental species showed up. Like this was the time of year. This is how often this species shows up. Definitely helps you figure out if you're wasting your time or not. I also really relied on Google Earth, like an aerial shot of a habitat, especially for things like rails. If you can kind of look at a location, and if you've been there before, you can kind of imagine the layout, and then you can almost match up in your mind the colors of the foliage with maybe the landscape, and it helps a little bit trying to figure out where might be the best place to look for a bird. So if a rare bird showed up at a giant hotspot, like we've been talking about Les Bluffs, so if someone reported one at Les Bluffs and didn't write like where it was, you might be able to use, which you always should write where it is if it's not a sensitive species, please. But if you're familiar with the area and you can use a nice satellite picture, you can narrow that down pretty easily and try to figure out where they saw it. At least narrow your options a little bit.
Yeah, there's a screech owl around St. Louis that I'm going to go see, and the guy gave me kind of not great directions, but I was on the edge of a field in a large field in a dead persimmon tree. And I'm like, oh gosh, this time of year, everything looks dead. But I got on Google Earth, and the Google Earth picture was during the summer, everything was green except one tree. This is all that was that dead persimmon tree. So it's a pretty useful tool.
Yeah.
We have a few more questions here. I don't want to keep you guys too much longer, so we'll try to get through these. So one from Adam: being a new birder, I have seen other birders at some places trying to find a bird at a hot location. What are the etiquettes when arriving at a spot with other birders? He doesn't want to make them mad.
Well, I think as long as you make every attempt, it depends how far the bird is from them, not to spook the bird. But if you show up and someone has the bird in the scope, someone's going to offer you a view of the bird. I mean, everybody helps everybody. So yeah, I think the main thing is like if you're looking at a shorebird or a wader or some waterfowl that's fairly close to the road, like if you have riverland and everybody's sitting in their car looking at this bird, probably don't get out of the car, because those cars act as a blind pretty effectively. And some of those birds, if you get out of your car and start to set up your scope, and if you flush the bird, you're going to have like 12 people staring at you. So, but for the most part, if you show up and everybody's standing there looking at the bird, everybody's going to help you get on the bird very quickly.
Definitely. A guy once said to me that birding is the only sport where you hold down the net so the other guy can make a goal.
Yeah, it's kind of like taking a kid fishing. It's more fun almost to put somebody on a bird.
Oh, definitely.
And just doing it yourself. You take little kids fishing. It's fun to watch them catch the fish.
Yeah, definitely say hi though. If you're at a hot spot and there's a bunch of birders there,
Oh, yeah.
Don't be afraid to approach them, introduce yourselves when the time is right.
Mhm.
Because like we've been talking about, forming that network is really cool. It's another rewarding facet of birding, is having those social interactions as well, not just the birds. And you already have a point of conversation, so
Right.
it should be easy.
My saw has a question asking, what would you define a birder? How would you define a birder or birding? You know,
Hmm.
what's their difference between, you know, bird watching or being a, you know, the label, the term of a birder?
Hmm. It's just,
I think that's, oh, go ahead, Dave.
okay. It's in my mind, it's just someone that likes getting outside and observing birds and their behavior. And I mean, there's all kinds of different levels. You know, some people are into the numbers. I really never was until last year. I just wanted to do that one time, and it was a lot of fun. I enjoyed it, but you know, some people just like to feed them in their backyards and watch them. But I personally I enjoy it because it gets me out to some great places. And I was walking around at Clarence Canyon National Wildlife Refuge today, and it was great. Didn't see anything unusual, but you know, the birds are there, and it gets me outside and into the natural world, which is what I really like.
I think the term is maybe intentionally vague, because depending on how you want to approach birds is really lets you define what the word is. So in that way, it's super inclusive, because I know people that don't necessarily know the species, but they have a bird feeder and they, you know, go out in the freezing cold and warm up water for those birds, and they don't know what they are, but they care about them. And I know people that, you know, travel internationally to see different species and are constantly, that's their thing. And people that are counting and people that travel around, and everybody has their own approach to it. And that kind of makes the activity even better. In fact, that we're all different and we all find our own niche within it, but we're all brought together by the birds.
Good answer.
Deep, Kendall, deep.
One question I have is, when are you going to do another big year?
I told my wife she had to do it with me if I was going to do another one.
That is exactly what I told my wife too. So, my wife is still working, but when she retires, she's talked about doing a national park big year with me.
That would be really cool.
Renting a van or an RV and driving all over the country, seeing what we can see in the national parks, which I don't think I'd give her much resistance on that. I'd be in for that for sure.
That sounds like a lot of fun.
Yeah.
So I guess this is the last question I think we have. It's a good one to end. You might have talked about it a little bit, Dave. It's about, what was your best personal find for your big year? And I don't know if, I know the brown booby was kind of up there, but I don't know if that was, you know, included in your big year, Kendall. So if you wanted to touch on your best personal find, or, you know, top 2 or 3 too.
Well, I mean, I did see that bird. I didn't find it. I don't know if I would consider that like a find per se for me. I think I hadn't really thought about it much, but there's a birder in St. Louis, Charlene Malone. She doesn't bird too much anymore, but she always used to say Memorial Day weekend is when you should look for windrolls. So I think it was the Friday of Memorial Day weekend. I drove up to Riverlands and didn't see much, and there was an island way out there, and I'm like, I thought I saw something move. So I got the scope out, and there's a windroll, which is a good bird. I kept looking, and they just kept popping up. They just kept popping up. And I don't know what the final count was, maybe 35 or something like that, which is just a crazy number for that bird. So I started calling people. I called Pete Monisel, because he had told me earlier that was a state bird farm. So he was able to get out there, but man, a lot of people got to get out there and see those birds. So that was kind of cool. Being able to find that many of the species that, you know, you're lucky to see, a couple a year.
I think my best was maybe yellow rail. I'd been talking with Tim Barksdale and he was like, okay, yellow rail, listen, this is what you need. You need late April, you need short, like wet prairie with a lot of sedge. So be on the lookout for that habitat. Keep that in mind when you're out birding, like watch for that habitat. And I was like, I know a field that's just like that. And we literally drove up and there was one right in front of the car. Like, and that's an extremely hard bird to find. They're nocturnal. They're about the size of your fist. They like walk underneath the plants and they're in this like mosquito infested swamp. So like finding one so easily where we didn't have to necessarily disrupt the habitat at all was really cool.
Yeah, that was a bird I missed. I looked for it, but that's a tough one.
It is.
Very tough.
Paige, are you seeing any more questions here that you want to ask?
Oh, there was one last one, which I think is kind of good because it's kind of looking to the future, which is, are there, and I believe the answer is yes, but maybe you can like give some more details, but are there any birds you will chase now that your big year is over?
Or I would still chase a state big bird. Like there was a cinnamon teal showed up near Joplin a few days ago. And I watched the eBird report. Somebody went out later in the day and it was gone, and people chased it the next day and nobody saw it. So I did not go down. But if that bird would have stuck, I would have gone down because I've never seen one in the state.
Yeah, Amy's actually who saw it. She's
Oh,
on.
is it?
Yeah, and I chased it. Paige and I were down there, didn't find it.
Mm-hmm. You don't have my phone number? You couldn't have called me sooner?
You can post that in the comments so next time.
Yeah.
Yeah, state birds, life birds, those are definitely birds that I'm willing to drive a good distance for. Or anything really rare that's kind of close, or if I'm available, I'll think about it. Like I went to Smithville earlier this year for a great blackback gull and a Iceland gull, and those are both birds I had for the state, but always good to see them.
Yep.
But now I'm more into trying to find stuff close to home.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm doing this year. I made a couple trips out of the area, but not doing that too much.
Well, awesome. Thank you guys so much. I mean, it was an honor. I really enjoyed this conversation and I learned a lot. I hope everybody else that was watching learned a little bit of what it's like, the mind of a big year birder. And maybe you've inspired a few people to try for one and break their records.
Hey, I forgot to ask, am I getting paid for doing this? No? Okay.
He'll find a bird for you later and that'll be your payment.
Yeah.
We're a nonprofit. Come on, Dave.
But I would just like to add that both of you have been getting wonderful comments in the chat. If you haven't seen them, we're thanking you. And I will just want to, Diane says that you are both absolutely great storytellers and could get anyone interested in birds. And I agree. So I'll pick out that comment. And lots of, fun times and thanking you. And we're very grateful that you took time out of your night to come.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. I hope some of the people that were watching were, birders that I met last year, because I consider all of them my friends. And
yeah,
if they were there, it was good kind of talking to them, even though I couldn't see them.
Yeah, maybe sometime we'll do like a series of just birder chats. That could be fun, just storytelling. Awesome. Okay, am I missing anything, Eric?
I don't think so.
All right, then I'm going to go ahead and close out the webinar, and thank you all. And the recording will be sent out later and available on YouTube, so it'll be good stuff.
All right.
But yeah, thank you everybody. Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Kendell. Thanks, Eric.
Thanks for
for
having me.
Absolutely.
healthy.
Take
Bye-bye.
care. Thank you, guys.
Bye.